Changers.
Hi, I'm Lexi. Welcome back to Gamechangers, powered by data.ai. Today, we are celebrating International Women's Day 2023 and shining a spotlight on amazing women in the mobile gaming space. We are featuring 3 inspiring and talented women in a 3-part series, so be sure to listen to the next 2. The conversations are deep and tackle tough topics head on. This year's International Women's Day theme is Cracking the Code, Innovation for a Gender Equal Future. And in line with this year's theme, we'll be championing women in STEM within the gaming world. And it is my pleasure in this episode to sit down with Shelby Moledina and talk about her journey, starting as a computer scientist developing games, leading up to her co-founding her own gaming studio focused on inclusivity in the gaming market. She is the definition of a trailblazer, and I am honored to talk with her about her inspiring story today. Now we have Shelby Moledina, and I will let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and what she's working on.
Hey, I'm Shelby. I'm the co-founder and game director at Double Loop Games. We're a mobile studio. We make games for people who may not consider themselves to be gamers, but love mobile games. I've been in games about 20 years now, over 20 years now, and I started as a programmer. I've done design, level design, product management, executive production, mostly studio development side, some publishing side, but my journey's kind of taken me through all the platforms. I started on console, moved into free-to-play web, then free-to-play mobile, and it's just been kind of a constant evolution for 20 years and taking on new projects and new roles, and that's kind of accumulated in my role now leading game development at our studio.
Amazing. Can you tell us a bit more about your studio and what your sort of ethos is and what you're working on?
Yeah, so our studio is about 20 people, and I co-founded it about 3 years ago with my co-founder Emily Greer, and this is the second company she's co-founded. She was the co-founder of Congregate and later CEO of that company, so she had a lot of experience with the business management side of things, fundraising and setting up a company and things that I didn't have experience with. So when she and I started talking about what we might want to do next, we got really excited talking about the type of studio we would want to create and what a natural fit there is between our experience and our goals and our overlapping experiences, but also the separate skills that we brought to it. The things that have really been important to us from the beginning have been culture in our studio, being very transparent, honest, people first. We really recognize that everybody has lives and that we all do our best work when we feel really supported. And psychological safety is a big one that Emily brought to the table that I hadn't heard that term before, but it is really core to what we do, that people feel safe to express what's going on in their lives and what's happening with them. And if something is coming in later, then it's really all about communication. It's not about like blame and kind of punishing people or anything like that. So we have a pretty trusting and safe and collaborative and creative studio. We're actually working on our second mobile game now, and it's been really amazing to, over the last 4 or 5 months, kick off the second game with the same team and to see how all that muscle memory we built on the first game is really paying off in how quickly we're building the second game, how in sync we are about decisions and taste. And that's really what we were doing, was wanting to build a really strong team, not a disposable team, a team that stays together and is creative together and builds game after game together better, every single one better than the last.
Absolutely. I feel like that emphasis on culture and people to feel like they're bringing their best selves and are safe to express what they need is super amazing to have that be at the forefront of hearing you talk about your studio as well. It seems like that's a very important value and probably attracts specific types of candidates as well.
I think so. Yeah, I think by the time people have come to the point where we're interviewing, they have already decided that yes, they're intrigued by what does it mean to work for a studio that's co-founded by 2 women. And if that is not something they're into, then they never get that far. So by the time we talk to people, they're pretty excited about it and interested. And I think we have a pretty good gender balance and diversity. Of course, we always want to improve on that. Something that I think this is pretty well known. It's really sometimes hard to hire women if you don't already have women in leadership positions. So if you're at a studio, like my first studio that I worked at, I was the only woman on the development team out of 25 people. We grew to about 60, and it was me and then or one or two other women on the dev team by the time we were 60. And it was just very, very hard because people are kind of looking around, where do I want to work? Where is going to be safe for me? And a studio that's not very diverse can be not the most attractive place to go. And so, yeah, really proud of that and how diverse and kind of just collaborative our studio is.
It seems that as well, part of what's attractive to having a studio that's more diverse is that people can feel that they are, maybe you don't have to explain as much, or that there's a natural understanding or empathy or like lived experience that, you can feel a little bit more seen without feeling you have to sort of possibly explain, or there's just a bit more of that feeling comfortable right away, maybe. That kind of baseline. You sort of break down the barrier faster, maybe.
Yeah, I think that people get excited about the idea of a place they can be comfortable and be themselves and be accepted and supported. They get excited about that, say, during their interview process. But I know from talking to our team members, what really cements it is when they come to their first versions of our team meetings. We do daily stand-up, and everyone is sort of chatting and having fun and is really on task, yet enjoying each other. And people do tend to really relax and feel really comfortable within a couple of days. And it's interesting because I, with a very diverse team, you don't necessarily always have shared experience, but you do have a team that is really ready to ask questions and listen and intellectually curious about not just game stuff, but people stuff, and how do we communicate better, and how do we make our processes better, and if something doesn't work perfectly smoothly, our team is really all about like digging in together and figuring that out. So I think that sense of openness to others' points of view really pays off in so many ways, some obvious and some non-obvious.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm just cultivating a bit more natural curiosity to improve processes or the game itself or your working relationships even. Awesome. All right. So, what is something you've kind of given us an outline of your career, how you got started in gaming, but I'm curious, what's something that most people don't know about you?
I don't know if I have a good answer for this one. I looked at the bullet points.
That's okay.
So I feel like I'm really an open book. Like if you're around me in real life, you will hear everything. Like I did theater as a kid. I do short films in Portland here on the weekends and have started to like get involved with that scene. And I dabble in art and I do all kinds of things. I have 3 kids. I have a degree in computer science. I have a wide variety of interests that I think for me all sort of feed my desire to learn more and integrate more of the world and my experience into the games that we're making and the team that we're working with. So yeah, I don't know if that's my answer on that one, but I did want to talk. I think I wanted to talk a little bit more about like getting started, but it also
Yeah.
relates to kind of your question about, do you remember the first time you saw someone who looked like you represented? Like that's really kind of core to me starting. So when I was a young kid, we had a computer at home and I played games, and that was kind of unusual, but I just played them and enjoyed them a lot and didn't know that other girls weren't playing games. But a real turning point for me was when I remember very clearly, I was like 11 in the early 90s, and I played one of the King's Quest games, King's Quest 6, and it came with the manual for the game, and there was a blurb about Roberta Williams, and she's a game designer, a very famous game designer at Sierra, who it was the first time I had seen anyone who looked anything like me in games. And at that time, obviously, there wasn't much going on as far as internet. There was no way to do a lot of research. So I sort of just devoured anything I could read about her and trying to figure out like, wow, making games, it can be a career, and how did she do it, and what does she do? And she was just really, really inspiring to me, and it kind of never left me. That idea that she was writing and doing design and game direction, and that model kind of stuck with me. It was a long time before I worked with many other women in the industry. As I kind of mentioned earlier, the first studio I worked at for 8 years was mostly men, and they were wonderful mentors and friends and coworkers. But I didn't see anyone who looked like me again for a long time, and so that kind of early model really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. It is interesting to think about how you would know about who was making your games
Yeah,
before the internet, right? With
yeah.
especially with mobile phones, we can look up anything at any time, but to have that pamphlet and to get that little bit of that enough of a nugget to kind of jump into a whole bunch of exploration on your own.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was like you couldn't really find out much about the people making games. You couldn't really find out much about what even are the jobs at a game studio. So I know when I wanted to get into games, I was looking around like, well, I do art, but I'm not the best artist. And I write, but I'm not the best writer. Like, what should I do? How could I break in? And computer science seemed like the most obvious way. So I went and I got a computer science degree, and that's how I started. But it was really only after I started working in games that I became aware of like what even is a producer. That's a job, and
Yeah.
how is design different than art, and those things just really weren't clear to me before I started. And over the years, that's been something I've been really passionate about when I talk to like elementary and middle school kids about what it is to be in games, to kind of just clarify all these different roles there are and how cross-functional game development teams are. One of the things I like best about it is just how it brings together people with such different perspectives and skills, and we make something great that none of us could have made on our own. Um, so yeah, that lack of clarity back then, especially, was tough. No internet, just just booklets from games and kind of guessing. So I think if I had known, there's really nothing I would change about my path, but I think I spent a lot of years unsure that becoming a game developer was even a real thing that I could do. It seemed like this weird pipe dream that was just a fantasy. And my path there ended up being pretty concrete, and it was computer science to getting a software job and starting as a programmer and blah blah blah, getting different experience and moving on. But I think there were probably 5 or 6 years before I got to college that I could have if I'd had a better idea of what the jobs were and what I could be working on as far as a portfolio and practice, then it would have seemed more real to me and not something that probably wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned that your studio is focused on games that are created for people who may not consider themselves gamers. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Is it part of the subject matter in the games, or the type of expanding the gameplay associated, or um, what sort of ways do you help create games for people who might not consider
That's
themselves
a
traditional?
really good question. So there are a lot of people who play mobile games and other games on other platforms, but a lot of people who play games who might play games for an hour or two a day and yet not consider themselves to be a gamer with that title gamer. And I think that's becoming more understood now. But gamer kind of connotes a specific type of player and types of games that they play. But people who are playing word games and puzzle games and other kinds of games are playing games. They do love games. It's a significant part of their life, and in games like that, we believe that there's an opportunity in puzzle games and hybrid games and games that are not strictly mid-core games. We believe there's an opportunity to bring more interesting gameplay there, especially in the area of social gameplay and collaborative play. There's a lot of things that have been done really well in mid-core and core games where people pull together to attack a giant boss together and everyone does little tiny percents of damage to it. But we've been looking at ways to translate the core pillars of that experience in a way that is fun and meaningful to players who are not playing those games. So That umbrella can encompass a wide variety of games. So we have been working in the space of puzzle hybrid games, puzzle and farming, and puzzle and other types of narrative games are all in the area that we like to play and see where we can bring new experiences to players.
Absolutely. I think um, it's definitely a central theme when we've looked at our data around who's playing games, what type of games are people playing, and I could not agree more with the sentiment that there's so much activity in the gaming space, and a lot of it is not people who would traditionally say, I'm a gamer, but they play, like you said, 1 hour a day of puzzle games or word games. And that social element is so important. And I think we saw very clearly, and a lot of people probably felt it very clearly over the pandemic and after, that that connection and the social gameplay is so important to feeling connected and happiness levels and
Oh yeah, so true. I mean, the beginning part of the pandemic, I feel like Animal Crossing, everyone was playing this, right? But it had almost no social features in the game, but this amazing, a really active social community sprung up around it, and that sharing art and talking to people and talking about our play online, that was a huge part of my life in the early pandemic in trying to stay connected to people, and it was really meaningful, and I'll cherish those memories forever, really.
absolutely. I played a lot of, and the name is escaping me, but we did a lot of family calls with, what is the app? I can't believe it's escaping me. It was acquired, but basically those like little micro games you could play while like having a big group FaceTime just to keep connected. And
Was it Jackbox or was it?
we have played Jackbox on
Oh,
PC. There was one on mobile,
mm.
and it was a pink icon with a yellow hand, and I cannot remember the name right now, but it was acquired shortly after. But that was a huge part of my. I live overseas for my family, and so during COVID, it was this way of connecting, and it provided a lot of not just connection, but like memories as well.
Yeah.
I don't remember every Zoom call where we just talk about life updates, but I do remember the games we played and how funny like my dad's drawings of a donkey were.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think you hit it. It's like doing something together, creating something together that really creates memories in a way that just talking and catching up doesn't really do. And it can really bond you in really great ways. So I think you hit right on it why the social part brings it to a whole other level.
Absolutely. All right. What are you most proud of in your career or in the gaming space specifically?
Well, honestly, the thing I'm the most proud of is the team that Emily and I have built. It's more about the team, and I know I was talking about this earlier, but I genuinely really like everybody on the team. Everyone is really respectful and professional and fun and creative, and we have this really amazing chemistry and working together that is really working for us and creating a lot of momentum. So that's been really wonderful. We don't One thing about our studio is that we're there and we're making games. We're not bogged down in a lot of politics and things that can get really really distracting from making games, so it's kind of this pure experience, and that's a lot of fun. I'm also really proud of doing that specifically during the pandemic. When Emily and I started the company, it was the two of us in September 29, 20, yeah, 29, September 2019. Emily and I started the company. We hired two people that fall. And then when the pandemic started, we were four people. And so you can imagine over the next few years, we grew to 20 people. And we've had to hire, I mean, everyone did this, right? Everyone learned how to do this, but it was definitely company building on hard mode. We raised our Series A funding. Um, we grew to 20 people. We built this culture. We built processes. We built one game and started a second, and just all kinds of things that we did in a way that we never expected to need to do it. So it kind of required all this creativity and flexibility, not just when it comes to game design, but how do we arrange the company and how do we communicate and what's the right amount of staying in touch and not. And I know every company that survived the pandemic had to go through this, but I'm really proud that we came out with a team and a company that is really working really well, going through that and kind of even starting in that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like building a company is creating almost something that feels like it's got not a life of its own, but it's bigger than itself in a way. And the vibe, and it's super impressive to have done that, especially in a time where you're trying to raise funds, it's early days, and then there's casually just a global pandemic. And
Yeah,
navigating that would have
just
been
throw that
crazy.
on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that I had worked for a lot of large companies before, and I had seen how anytime we tried to make a culture change, how very difficult it was, because you can look at a company that's been around 50 years and you can basically trace the elements of the current culture back to its roots at the inception of it. And it's really interesting how those things can express themselves in ways that are unexpected, like I said, 50 years later. So Emily and I talked about that a lot, and we talked about it a lot with our team. We're very transparent that we tried to keep in mind that everything we did from the beginning would, in some way, unexpectedly, sort of set a precedent for what is the double loop way of doing things? How is our culture? How is our process? So I feel like that's another thing I'm really proud of, that we were really intentional about how we set our company up and how much documentation we do, processes, that we weren't just flying by the seat of our pants and like figure it out later. We knew we were building for the long run and building for a larger company. So I feel like we've also been able to really benefit from that intentionality, and that I'm proud of that as well.
Absolutely. As I was listening to you in the beginning, all I could think about was really having intention. And then you said that exact word later, and it's like it really does come through with how you talk about structuring the business. I mean, we did talk about the pandemic in the early days, so this very well could have been the biggest hurdle. But what were some of the biggest hurdles you've had to overcome in the last few years with your studio?
I think the probably the biggest hurdles we've had to overcome have been something that's true on every game and every studio I've ever worked at, which are, you're working on a game and you need to know how much to continue to invest in a direction versus pivot a direction, whether it's a feature or the game itself. And at a small studio like us, it's like, I was at a design retreat, by the way, this fall, where somebody brought up this metaphor. This is not my metaphor, I can't remember whose it was, but it's sort of like you're out in the open ocean in a canoe and you have to pick a direction and you got to go that direction. And that's what it's like being a very small studio. When you're at a large studio or you're working with a giant IP, you have to make decisions and you learn a lot and you have a sense of which way to go. But there are some guardrails or more people to bounce things off of, or whether maybe you disagree with it, but there might be a licensor saying, nope, you can't do that. You have to go that way. That sort of thing. And so there's this like freedom and power and joy in being able to kind of chart your own course. But there are times when it is so scary. And those are the times where I have to sort of take a breath and not get sucked really deeply into imposter syndrome, which is something I know a lot of people struggle with. Women tend to struggle with it at even higher rates. And to not kind of get sucked into like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. There's 20 people depending on me, but to just take a breath and step back and go, okay, this is the information we have. These are the people I am working with, and we can talk about these things and break the problems down together. And we're going to make the best decisions we can make given the information that we have, and be okay with that. And maybe we look back and we maybe didn't make a right decision here or there, but at least we feel confident that we did the best we could with the information that we had. So that's not it's something I had encountered in the past, but the scale of it as a co-founder of a small studio is really new and frightening and exciting and all of the things.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword. It's sort of like there's so much, like you said, freedom in the choice, but then also it's also very daunting.
Yes, and I think the responsibility to the team, because like I said earlier, I care so much about them, and Emily and I both do, and we feel very responsible. We want to be responsible in all the decisions that we make, in the way that we spend money, in the way that we plan. And so if I've made a decision that can negatively impact people, then that, cuts to my heart a lot deeper than some other types of mistakes that we may or may not make.
Absolutely. It really does sound you guys have built a very people first culture that you work in as well.
Definitely. I mean, it's been shown many times that it's great teams that make great games. You don't just assemble a random group of people and give them a document and they make a great game. So in order to A, have fun, but also B, make great games, it's really important that we build a great team, and that it's a team that's healthy, and that we don't lose half the team after we ship one game because they're so sick of the toxic workplace. Like, you want to keep the team together and to get stronger with every game. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And it sounds like what you had said has really strong business benefits for you guys have all this muscle memory now that you don't have to, pause and sort of rehire if you had a lot of attrition after a game launch. You sort of can just build and then become faster or better or, go deeper.
That's very true. And it's been great to have the trust of the team as we've done things like we decided to take a week and do a team hackathon. And it was not directly applicable to the game we were working on, but we felt the team needed some time to recharge their creative energy, for us to look at the numbers and see what was happening with the game live, things like that. And we were able to just talk through that a lot with the team, and they're on the journey with us. They're signed up and they're excited. They always have questions, which we always try to answer and be as transparent as possible. And when you have that kind of mutual trust, then we're able to navigate these crazy waves out in this crazy ocean we're in. And sometimes that means doing something different this week than we said we were doing last week, but we always try to explain why that is and what the thought process was, and to talk about it. So it's not just them being yanked around, willy-nilly with no idea of what's happening and why. So we try to really make it a team-based thing.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a really nice layer of transparency with your team as well, so they feel empowered and a part of the understanding of what changes and why.
That's what we try to do. It's something that we aspire to. I would never say we're perfect at it. I mean, even just this last couple of weeks, there was some stuff that Emily and I were working on very quickly, and then we would have a question here or there for people, and people would be like, okay, well, what does that mean? What's going on? What's the context here? And because we were always transparent, I didn't feel that there was a mistrust. There was just like, okay, now we need to step back, reset, sort of explain what's going on and bring more people into it, and then move forward on this. So we're definitely not perfect at it, but it is always the goal, and the team always knows they can just ask if they're like, what are you doing?
So good. It sounds like such an awesome culture you have, you and your co-founder Emily have created. I'm curious as well, what women do you admire in gaming or even outside of gaming?
Um, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean this in a cheesy way, but my co-founder Emily is one of the top people that I would answer this question with. And it's why we work together. I admire her as an ethical person. I admire her courage and bravery and tenacity. She also co-founded a studio, she co-founded a company, Congregate, a few years back, when she had never been in games before, but she had a sense that what this company was going to be was something really interesting and a really good idea, and something she wanted to put her all into. So she went into this business that she hadn't worked in before. She went into a culture of raising money from VCs who were, to be frank, in many cases very sexist, and didn't want to talk to her at first, but she's kind of like a person who's like, she demands to be heard and seen, and you're not going to ignore her. And I really admire her for that, and she does it in a very ethical way. And she weathered some really hard times in that company, and shepherded it through difficult times with the economy and did a really amazing job as the CEO of Congregate. So she's definitely, way, way up there. And yeah, so she comes to mind first. There's a few other people, and I'm lucky to call a lot of these women friends now. I don't mean to just say, well, I admire my friends because they're great. It's sort of a chicken and the egg issue thing where I admire them, we become friends. So another person I really admire is Teresa Duringer, and she is designer and founder of a digital board games company, and she is just an amazing, scrappy, creative, hardworking person who's just continues to make games that people love, and she's an amazing designer and a wonderful friend. And she's doing it in a way that the rest of the world doesn't always understand, because they're a very tiny studio and they've stayed 2 to 3 people for a very long time and continued to thrive. And that's not the typical path through video game development, but she makes it work and it's amazing. So I think women like that who are pioneers and kind of have that courage to chart a course into the unknown and are willing to just learn as they go, that's always really impressive to me.
And that's also super impressive. I like the idea that of what you just said around how she's maintained a company that's around 2 to 3 people, which is not the norm. And I think that's really powerful because there are a lot of versions of success for individuals and for companies that do not always mirror what people think it needs to. You start a company, you need to grow X by this point, and the goal is to be as big as possible and I think that sometimes it's about knowing where you want to go and being super comfortable and not having those pressures affect you. And I think that's a very powerful viewpoint. Like that, as you said, they've been very successful and they've stayed small. And that success does not always mean the flashiness of brand new rounds of funding or expansion. You can be super successful in other ways. And that's a really powerful example for people to see.
Yeah, that's so right. And her company's called Templegate Games, and they make Dominion and a bunch of other board games that are really well loved. And like you said, their success is they have a lot of people who love their games, and they have more offers for business and expansion than they want because they stick to what they believe in and they do it really, really, really well. And that's what's important. I completely agree with what you said. Finding your
Yeah.
pillars and your goals, and that's the way to be truly successful. If you are trying to just copy paste what someone else is doing, whether company structure or game wise, you're never going to be that successful because you won't understand the fundamentals of why they're making those decisions. And when something comes up that you can't just copy, what are you going to do? So, yep, charting your own course is very important, but also finding people and mentors and people to bounce ideas off of and always listen. That's part of it as well.
Absolutely. I feel like all the companies you mentioned and the folks I'm hitting follow on all the LinkedIn, all the it's really awesome. I think the more examples of that, the more people can also feel seen and feel that their aspirations are valid because they don't need to found the next, say, even Facebook, for instance. It can be highly individual and then also super values aligned. I think that that's a really important point I'm at least taking away from talking with you today is how important knowing your values and sort of sticking with them, and you'll find success if you do.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It's difficult, but at least whether you find success or you don't, at least, you can live with yourself and sleep at night that you did the very best you can, because there's so many things outside of our control, like the economy and all kinds of things. The pandemic, who knew that was coming? So yeah, the best you can do is stick to your values and make decisions with the information that you have at the time. And I think the hardest part is not beating yourself up in hindsight when you're like, oh, I should have done it differently if only I had known this. But truly, you didn't know that information was not there, that there was a pandemic coming or whatever. So you got to just keep moving forward and learning.
Absolutely. I think you've given us a ton of advice already in all the different ways you've answered these questions. But I would also say, my final sort of question to you would be, is there any advice you would give for other women looking to thrive in the gaming space or even tech at large?
One piece of advice I would give to everyone, whether women or however they identify, would be that something that I felt served me really well was that when there was something new that needed to be done on a game or in the studio, I would always raise my hand, even if I didn't know exactly how to do it, but just to try to figure it out. And that gave me a lot of options in my career. It let me evolve and understand the business from top to bottom and left to right and all around, and to understand the context on things. So, getting as much context as you can around the products you're working on, I think can be really, really powerful in the long run if you keep building those experiences up. Um, you may still want to stay, in your specialty long run, but having more context for it is very, very helpful. Um, and to women, I think, especially starting out, something I struggled with a lot, being somewhat isolated, as I mentioned, I was the only woman on a somewhat larger team. And a lot of times I wondered whether the communication challenges or other challenges I was having, whether they were just me or if it was part of being a minority in a group. And I had no context for that. And I guess this word context is really important to me. I had no context for that. Until I was able to connect with more women in the game industry and talk to them and start hearing their stories. And I went to a round table at GDC, my maybe second year in the game industry, and I didn't speak. I was so scared and so shy, but I heard lots of people talking about all of these things that I had experienced where there's all kinds of weird dynamics and pressure that happen when you're one of any minority, representing any minority in a group. Um, and that all sort of gave me more confidence to kind of go home and recontextualize the issues I was having and maybe stop blaming myself so much, but also figure out what my part in it was, where I could speak up, what I could change. And I started to find my voice and my power that way. And it came from knowing I wasn't alone. And so I definitely think finding other women to kind of check in with and be support for, whether they're at your studio or not, is really incredibly important.
Yeah, that really resonates. I think having shared experience or feeling seen, like you said, feeling like it's not, you know, it's not just you or it's not just in your head. Like, does this keep happening in this place or is this just in my head? Am I being, what's going on here? And having that almost community or feeling like you can validate in your own sort of perceptions and think about how, as you said, you sort of went back and thought about the things you could change. It feels like it's very empowering to think, okay, now I understand this more, I have more context, it's a bit more clear to me what I can do to kind of get over this thing, whatever that is.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, awesome. This has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I think the only other question I'll leave you with, I believe I lied before when I said there was just one, is what does, International Women's Day, Women's Month mean to you?
For me, it means stepping back and looking at how different the world is now than it was when I look at my life when I started thinking about becoming a game developer, and just looking at how far we've come in how much more vocal and visible women are in many areas of life, and yet there are so many areas out there that there's such long strides to go. So I think it's kind of a time to step back, take stock, celebrate the wins, identify the opportunities and the issues, and to kind of regroup and move forward. Because sometimes we can always if we just keep moving forward without taking that time to breathe and think about things, we sometimes run ourselves into corners. So it's always good to stop and think about where we're at.
Definitely. I love that. It sort of reminds me of your canoe
Yeah.
metaphor before, where it's like if you just keep paddling that direction, like you very well might just be.
There might be a waterfall over there. I don't know.
Reflect on how far you've come and then think if I need to course correct or.
Exactly.
I love it. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been super fun.
Yeah, it was really great meeting you. Thanks for having me.